We're ready to get things rolling. We are continuing working our way through kind of an overview of the Old Testament in particular. And we have worked our way out of the Judges. And last week, we've kind of concluded the time frame of the Judges by talking about Ruth, which one of the things that the story of Ruth does for us is that it demonstrates that even though the Judges is characterized by what phrase? Failure. Thank you. Yes, that's perfect. But the phrase from the scripture itself, because it is just complete, total failure, absolutely. But it ends with what phrase? All right, in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And when you read the word everyone, or always, or all within the Bible, what that means is that an absolute is absolute. And you can never have anything less than absolute, right? Was there anybody in the time frame of the Judges who did what was right in God's eyes and not his own? Yeah. Boaz, right? The story of Ruth demonstrates that there is a man in Israel who does what is right in God's eyes and does not just simply seek his own. And the story of Ruth enters into this story, a Moabite, who also, after she pledges allegiance to Israel, to God, the God of Israel, and joins, she does what is right in God's eyes. So even though it says everyone did what was right in his own eyes, we're able to say, well, yeah, we know that an absolute statement isn't necessarily an absolute statement, right? And that's the way that it is. Ruth demonstrates there are people who are doing what is right in the eyes of the Lord. So as we move then into 1 Samuel, I just want to remind you that if you are reading through the Hebrew Bible and you read the very beginning of 1 Samuel, what have you just read? All right, the end of Judges, where it says, the very last phrase that you just read is what we just said a second ago. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And I'm reiterating this. I brought it up basically out of turn earlier. I meant to hold on to it, but I get so excited about certain things and showing certain things that it came out before it was supposed to. But if you're reading the end of Judges, the final narratives, 17 and 18, and then 19, 20, and 21, those are two separate narratives that we talked about. They basically both begin with what general phrase? All right, there was a man in the Hill Country of Ephraim. Give me 1 second here. I'm probably going to need this, I would think, at some point. All right, so both of them begin with the phrase, there was a man in the Hill Country of Ephraim. Right? So, there was a man in the Hill Country of Ephraim, and although it's not particular to our story today, what other cities get some discussion? What's that? All right, Bethlehem. I'm just going to put these up here. What else? Okay. Jabesh, Gilead. I heard that one. That one will, yeah. What else? Someone said Jebus a second ago, I think, is what I heard. One more. Gibeah. These are all cities, as well as the Hill Country of Ephraim, that are key cities, key places in the stories at the end of Judges. These last two narratives contain all of this, and it's not so important that geographically you know where all of this is as much as literarily you're able to see what's going to happen moving from the last two narratives in Judges, moving straight into 1 Samuel. Because how does 1 Samuel begin? All right, very good. 1 Samuel begins, there's a man from the Hill Country of Ephraim. And you've seen that phrase, the last two stories that you've read has begun that way. How did those stories end up, by the way? Horrible. You're like, oh man, any story that starts with there was a man from the Hill Country of Ephraim, I think I might just want to skip over this story. Exactly, Joshua. It just ends badly. You know bad things are going to happen. And so you turn the page and, oh no, not again. Here's another one that starts with the man from the Hill Country of Ephraim. And there's a lot, by the way. I think I say this every week. There's a ton of stuff that we can start unpacking. And I have to be kind of judicious a little bit because I don't want to turn this into a study of the book of 1 Samuel. It could get there. Especially the first 15, 16, 17 chapters or so. But I don't want to get bogged down in these first couple chapters. I'm going to, assume that you're somewhat relatively familiar with these, because it begins, this man who is from the Hill Country of Ephraim, he is a man who has how many wives? 2 wives, right? So this is a man with 2 wives, and one of them was what? Barren, unable to have children. Have we seen stories like this before if you're reading through the Bible? Yes. Yeah. And this is a key component to keep in mind, that stories get repeated. Not the exact same story. Things usually shift just a little bit. Things become just a little bit different in the telling of them from time to time. But the way that things work, the stories get repeated. And there's a phrase for this, by the way. I'm going to just throw this out there. Intercontextuality. What that means is when you see these narratives that sound very familiar, you're supposed to see these connections as you play through, that the early ones help shape how you read the later ones. Like how many stories at wells do you see in in Genesis, that deal with women and wells? There's an intercontextuality. Multiple times you see people in a famine who are going and going somewhere else to escape that famine. And then the things that happen where they might lie about who their wife is. Intertextuality. All of these types of things, these narratives get repeated. We saw that in Judges, right? We saw that what happens in Gibeah was very similar to what happened in Sodom. And you're supposed to, intertextuality, you're supposed to read one in light of the other, in light of the previous. It helps. It informs what it is that you're reading. Sometimes it overlaps so that you say, wow, this is the same thing. Sometimes you read it and you go, oh, there's some very key differences here. What are those? And why do those make a difference? So, in this story right here, we have a man, and he has 2 wives, and one is barren, and she also happens to be what? The favorite, the one who is loved. Does that sound familiar? Yeah, right? We have the one who's barren, the one who is loved. The one who's barren and loved, and then you have the other one. How does this story play out differently? Okay, Sean says the one who is barren, the one who's loved, is actually in this account the one who, what'd you say? What was the phrase you used? The good one. There we go. Technical language there. She's the one who is the good one. She is, you would say, kind of the protagonist of this story, of this narrative. That's different from what we saw with Rachel and Leah, because it was the one who was loved and who was barren who actually was the antagonist and was the one that rubbed it in to some degree. So here it plays out differently. And so that immediately is supposed to say, okay, well, we're dealing with a little different scenario. This is working a little bit differently. And so you have this man, poor Elkanah. He tries, I guess. He has these two women. They are rivals to one another. And the one who has the children really rubs it in on the other to make her life miserable. And verse 8, chapter 1, verse 8, poor Elkanah, her husband said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? Why do you not eat? Why is your heart sad? Am I not more to you than 10 sons? I mean, come on. How many of y'all think that's a good thing for him to say to his wife at this moment? No hands? Really? No. He's trying, right? Men, come on. You've been there where you're like, oh, man, I need to say something. What can I say? And then it turns out it's the wrong thing. Yeah, right? This is the wrong thing. This is highly insensitive. It doesn't help the scenario. It doesn't help the situation. Anyway, it is a highly insensitive type of thing just to try to make her feel better, but it doesn't help. So verse 9, after they'd eaten, they drunk in Shiloh, Hannah rose, and Eli the priest was sitting in the seat beside the doorpost of the temple. She was deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly and vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your servant, if you will indeed remember me, not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a son, I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall touch his head. As she continued praying before the Lord, Eli observed her mouth, because Hannah was speaking in her heart only. Her lips moved, and her voice was not heard. Therefore, what did Eli assume about her? That she's drunk. He comes up to her seriously. How long will you go on being drunk? Put this wine away from you. Now, consider for just a moment a priest, an old priest, at the temple sees a person who is so deeply grieved and deeply moved that this person is to the point of tears and is silently praying and is overcome with emotion. And his assumption is that she's what? That she's drunk. What does that say to you? What does that indicate? Any thoughts? Yeah, Kelly?
Either he's really jaded or society's in a pretty sad spot and he sees drunk people at the temple a lot.
Yeah. Consider this. How many people do you think he has seen who are deeply moved and emotional and coming before God in this kind of a way at the temple? Which, by the way, if you're going to do this anywhere, the temple's the place to do it, right? How many people through the years do you think he has seen like this? If he saw it a lot, would his first thought be this person's drunk? Can you see what's going on here? He is more accustomed to people being verschnickered and coming to the temple and getting annoyed with it than he is seeing absolute, real, raw people who are in a deep relationship with God and deeply troubled by it. And this gets to what Kelly is saying. This is the state of Israel at this point in time. You don't have people who come to God weeping and crying and with this kind of an emotional appeal at the temple, because the priest who's there doesn't even recognize it for what it is. He immediately, and maybe he is jaded, as Kelly said, but he immediately says, all right, got another one of these drunk people here again. It's like, seriously, put the wine away, buddy, and move on with you. But Hannah answered, I am just a woman troubled in spirit. I've drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I've been pouring out my soul before the Lord. By the way, play on words, right? I have not been pouring anything in me. I've not drunk anything. I am pouring out my soul. It's not alcohol that's being poured out here. My soul is being poured out before the Lord. Do not regard your service as a worthless woman, for all along I've been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation. So Eli says, go in peace. The God of Israel grant your petition that you've made to him. She said, let your servant find favor in your eyes. And so she went away, ate, and her face was no longer sad. So what happens? Following this, what happens? Does she get her petition? Does she get what she asked for? Yeah, she gets her son, and then she brings her son, and verse 20, in due time Hannah conceived, bore a son, called his name what? Samuel, and said, I have asked for him from the Lord. And so the idea of Samuel, you've heard of the Shema before, right? Hear, listen, hear, O Israel. Shamuel, Shema, Shamuel is actually, it's not Samuel, it's Shamuel. And so it's from the Shema word. God has heard what it is that I have cried out. And so that's why she names him Samuel or Shamuel. It says, because I asked for him from the Lord, meaning that God has heard that. So, Elkanah goes back. Once the child's weaned, the child is brought and then is given to the Lord. She upholds what it is that she had vowed before. Verse 26, she said, my Lord, as you live, I am the woman who was standing here in your presence, praying to the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me my petition that I made to him. Therefore, I have lent him to the Lord. By the way, that's a really difficult phrase to translate well. What do some of y'all have there in verse 28? Therefore, do y'all have, I have lent him to the Lord? Is that what's... Anybody else have anything different from that? Okay, I have dedicated him to the Lord. Which might be the other way. Yeah, Eileen, what do you have? Given? Yeah, gifted. Okay, I've gifted. Is that right? I give him. Okay, Eileen says, I give him to the... Eileen doesn't say that. Eileen says that her translation says that. We're not throwing this one on you, Eileen. Don't worry. So, all right. But it's this idea, and yeah, again, I lent him. Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't sit well, the idea, but it's not an easy word to translate. But hopefully, if I remember, we're going to come back to this word. It might be a few weeks, but we're going to come back to it because it's actually really interesting. All right, so we get into chapter 2. Hannah provides this prayer, which is really interesting, as a prayer. But anyway, I don't want to find ourselves just going through all of this. But I do want to at least look at the end, because Well, it's just interesting. I'll start in verse 9. Talking about the Lord, he will guard the feet of his faithful ones, but the wicked will be cut off in darkness. For not by might shall a man prevail. The adversaries of the Lord shall be broken to pieces. Against them he will thunder in heaven. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his what? Strength to his king, and exalt the horn of his anointed one. Why is that interesting? Because as of yet, they have no king. She gives this prayer, and in the midst of this prayer, she says, hey, the Lord is going to give strength to his king and exalt the horn of the one who's anointed, and using parallelism, the one anointed to be king. Why is she suddenly talking about kingship here? Okay, Samuel says because they really need a king. And I think this clearly ties into the ending of Judges, doesn't it? In those days, there was no what? There's no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. How does Samuel begin? By the way, I'm going to say Samuel a lot instead of 1st and 2nd Samuel because it's Samuel. It wasn't split until they started to put it on scrolls, I think is kind of what it was, and they fit so much on one, so much on the other. But it's not considered two separate books. In the Hebrew Bible, it's just Samuel and then Kings. I mean, that's all that it is. So if you hear me say Samuel without a first or a second, that's kind of why. But how is Samuel beginning? What's the tenor of this song? Like, what's it doing? Okay, talking about something that's going to happen, yes, in a negative or a positive way. All right, in a positive way. Judges ends in failure because there is no king. Horrible, abject despair. And then you have a narrative opening up Samuel that starts the exact same way, and you are already trained, you're already conditioned to assume that a story that starts with this is going to end up in desperation and despair, and instead, this story is going to end with her talking about what? Four-letter word that rhymes with mope. Hope, yes. This is a prayer of hope moving forward. This is a prayer that puts trust back in God for the people. This is a prayer that says, we're not going to act like they did in the days where there is no king in Israel. Right now, we're looking forward. And whether or not Hannah actually said these words, or if this is the work of a redactor at some point who is going through what was written and adjust it slightly, because we know, and the editor knows, and everyone knows, where is 1 Samuel going? If you were to think of what the importance of 1 Samuel is all about, what is it? It's the book where you what? Samuel anoints a king. This is the book where they get a king in Israel. And not just any king, but the king of Israel is anointed by Samuel in this book, right? So, whether or not Hannah literally said these words is kind of irrelevant. What makes a difference is that the author here, the writer, the one who's telling the story, is right here in the very beginning putting these words here and saying, this is where we're going. we're moving forward in hope in a time in which there will be a king, an anointed one of God, that's going to bring blessing upon Israel. Can you see the point of that? Is everybody with me? Am I not making sense here? Yeah, Kelly?
You're making sense. I'm just wondering, is there some kind of collegial argument about whether or not she actually said this? Because I've never heard this before. I mean, if it's pointing forward, I would just assume it was prophecy of some kind.
Yeah, I only say that because it's weird for her to speak of a king when there is no king. And this isn't the Holy Spirit suddenly taking her over and saying, hey, there's going to be a king, or something like that. This is the prayer of a woman who's had her prayer answered. And this is how it's being brought out. So my point is, it makes an awful lot of sense to me if the one who is authoring this takes the opportunity to put a message of hope within her prayer right here in order to start the story, start the narrative at the very beginning, saying, this is where we're headed. We're headed towards hope that you find, hope that's going to come in the form of a king in Israel. Yeah, Bruce?
Yeah, how does this king of Israel, how does that relate to the king of Salem that we read about?
Well, the king of Salem would serve as back in Genesis, I think 14, he serves as kind of a type of foreshadowing of ultimately what was to come, because the king of Salem is going, Salem being what city eventually? Jerusalem. And so the king of Salem ties in very specifically with the king of Jerusalem, which is going to come. And so, it's a pre-shadow, I guess you could say, of what this is talking about. That is the king to come who's going to sit on the throne. All right, so again, my whole point is chapters 1 and 2 break this problem, this conundrum. We have now left the judges. And even though oftentimes people say, well, yes, we have 2 more judges, Eli and Samuel serve as judges, right? We have our list of judges, and they're the final 2. Everyone, we're good with that, right? But the book of Judges is over. The time period of the judges is basically finished at this point. That was a period that was marked by the phrase, in those days there was no king in Israel, everyone did what was right in his own eyes. This time period starts the same way as the last one ended, but it breaks the cycle, and it says things are going to be good from here on out. We're going to have a king that's going to be placed in Israel, and we are going to end up being blessed. God will exalt the horn of his anointed one, of his king. So that's what is now pushing our narrative forward. It's an introduction, basically, to Samuel that says, we're out of Judges. Now we're going to the time frame of the kings. In this, we then have the story. Elkanah, in verse 11, went to Ramah and left the boy there. And then you have this, between verses 11 and 12, you have this juxtaposition that takes place between the one who was left and the one who was left. It says he was ministering to the Lord in the presence of Eli the priest. And then the very next phrase is about whom? All right, the worthless sons of Eli. And I hope you've been seeing this worthless, this phrase coming up again and again. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't, because I haven't really been stressing it. But remember that Eli, thought that Hannah was worthless. And then she said, let's see here. Anyway, it came up again, verse 116, do not regard your servant as worthless. But who is worthless? It's not the one that Eli supposed was worthless at the temple. It's actually whom? His sons who are worthless at the temple. And so this is a lot of play on words, by the way. A lot of repeated words, repeated phrases, repeated things, ideas and stuff that just really comes alive through the text of 1 Samuel. Why? What was wrong with Eli's sons? Why were they considered to be worthless? Okay. They did not know the Lord. Why? What were they doing? Okay, but you got to be more specific than they broke God's law. In what way? Yeah, Kelly?
If I remember right, they slept with the temple prostitutes, and they took the meat before it was given to God. They wanted the good stuff to eat, so they'd stick some kind of fork in the pot and get what they wanted.
Okay, all right. So those are the two things that they do. Interestingly enough, out of those two, one of them is bringing women to the temple in order to have sexual relations and basically dishonor the place. And the other one is eating meat before they've cut out the part that's supposed to be given to God. Out of those two, which is the worst? Clearly. Yeah. I mean, God makes it clear, out of those, dishonoring God by taking the portion that should be his, that is the worst of the crimes. That's the one that is stressed more than the other. And I find that very interesting, because we might think that the worst is desecrating the temple with the illicit relations and things like that would be the worst thing. But God says, no. You going in and taking your choice parts of the meat before the parts that are supposed to be mine go to me, that is the worst part. And this brings us then into chapter 3. And in chapter 3, Samuel, this is the story where Samuel is called. And I'm going to assume that you have probably heard this story before. Samuel is in bed at night, and what does he hear? All right, yeah. God is speaking to him, right? It says in chapter 3, verse 4, the Lord called Samuel. And he said, here I am. And he ran to whom? Yeah, he runs to Eli. And he's like, what do you need? And Eli's like, dude, it's the middle of the night. What do you mean? I did not call you. Go back to bed, right? Well, this happens multiple times. Finally, Eli's like, oh, all right. Next time that this happens, he says, go lie down. If he calls you, say, speak. What? Speak. Your servant is listening. Well, before that, Yahweh. Speak. Yahweh. Right? Your servant is listening. So, that was the third time, I believe, now that when that happens. And so then, Samuel, he hears, he says, speak, for your servant hears. And the Lord said to Samuel what he's about to do. He's bringing judgment on Israel, judgment on Eli's house. And I just one thing that I want to stress that I really could bring out through this, and sometime read through this and take a look at this. This all begins in verse 2. At that time, Eli, who's what? Verse 2. What does it say about Eli? All right, his eyesight had gone dim. Well, that's a weird tidbit of information to give, isn't it? What does that have to do with the call of Samuel? I would say not really anything. But what's the next phrase? In verse 3. What's the next phrase? All right, the lamp of God had not yet gone out. What does that have to do with Samuel and his eyesight? What is eyesight? I'm not like reaching here. What is eyesight? What is it? The ability to see things? Yeah, but be more technical. It's where you see stuff? Yeah, but how? How do you see? Right. The eye is the lamp, right, for the body. Becky just said, she gave a very technical definition, but I'll just put it this way. It's light that enters in, right? It's the light receptacles within your body. Light comes in and your body figures out what it is. But like I said, Jesus talks about the eyes being the lamp, being how light comes in. When your eyesight is dimming, that's like a what? A lamp that is dimming, a lamp that's going out. And he says that Eli's eyesight is going in the same way that the people of God and their relationship with him is going. The prophetic activity is dimming, but has it gone out yet? No. Why not? Because Samuel is here. Eli, he's dimming. His prophetic ability is dimming. His place as a prophet of God and a priest of God, it's dimming. His eyesight, in a metaphorical way, is dimming, and it's going out. But God is not done yet, because now Samuel is being raised to that level, to that place. And he's being put in this position where God is going to now speak through Samuel. And the very first declaration that he gives to Samuel is actually against whom? It's against Eli and Eli's sons. So when he wakes up, Eli is like, all right, tell me what he said. Don't hold anything back. And he does. And Eli, he accepts it. So read through all of this sometime and look for references to light, darkness, dimming, that type of stuff. And you kind of see them in there. Also, throughout all of this, look for references to weight, which is the same word as importance, which, importance is a kind of weight, a weight, a heaviness of status that you have. And so you'll have this sense of people who seem to be weighty and important and heavy, but things actually go poorly for them. And one of the best examples is going to be Eli. All right, we move forward, running out of time here. In chapter 4, this is where they come out to fight. Let me make sure I'm not forgetting anything that I really want to say here. All right. So he's raised up Samuel as a prophet. That's the important thing. So the Israelites go to fight the Philistines, and it looked like a really bad situation for them into chapter 4. The Philistines drew up against Israel, and when the battle spread, Israel was defeated before the Philistines, who killed about 4,000 men on the battlefield. That was verse 2. Verse 3, when the people came to the camp, the elders of Israel said, Why has the Lord defeated us today before the Philistines? I know what we'll do. What are they going to do? Yeah. Why did we lose? Why did God allow us to lose? What's their answer? Why did God allow them to lose? All right, Sean just said, because he wasn't with them. No wonder they lost. They didn't bring God with them. Huh. Duh. All right, let's go get the ark. And that way, when we bring the ark into the camp, then we're also bringing whom with us? We're bringing God with us. And so they bring the ark, and everybody's cheering, and all kinds of fanfare and celebration, and the Philistines, they're like, whoa, what's going on over there? And then word gets through, they're like, oh man, they brought the ark with them. They've now brought their God into the camp. Oh, and so you see then, verse 7, the Philistines were afraid. They said, a God has come into the camp. Woe to us! Nothing like this has happened before. Woe to us! Who can deliver us from the power of these mighty gods? These are the gods who struck the Egyptians with every sort of plague in the wilderness. Do they know about the God of Israel? Yeah. And their phrase, who can deliver us from the hands of these gods? Is there anyone who can deliver them from the hand of Yahweh? Absolutely not. If the hand of Yahweh is against them, there is no way to deliver them. But what's the problem? The hand of Yahweh was not against them. Why? They had the ark. They brought God with them. Why? How could they possibly have lost? Okay. Ooh, very good, Olivia, because bringing the ark doesn't mean you've brought God. It's as if they believed that God was tied to a chain to this box. And as long as you've got the box, then he's drug into the battle. It's as if in some relationship that they have, that he is confined to this. Without it, they'll lose. With it, they'll obviously win. It's like he's a little toy monkey that they bring around to perform for them when they ask, right? Is that who God is? No, not in any way, shape, or form. And God says, I'm not your toy monkey. I'm not just going to come in and perform for you. In fact, what happens to the ark? It's taken. The Philistines not only win the battle, by the way, they kill a whole lot more people than 4,000. They kill what priests? Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas. They're killed in battle, and the Ark of the Covenant is taken. Well, news gets back. And who is anxiously awaiting news? Eli. A man said to Eli, verse 16, I am he who comes from the battle. I fled from the battle today. And he says, how did it go, my son? He who brought the news answered and said, Israel has fled before the Philistines. There's been a great defeat among the people. Your two sons also, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the ark of God has been captured. As soon as he mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell over backward from his seat by the side of the gate, and his neck was broken, and he died, because the man was what? Old and heavy. Remember we talked about the word heavy and the picture of what heaviness. Those of high stature, those of high status, those who have led Israel to some degree in all of this, they are now meeting their demise. He died, old and heavy. He had judged Israel for 40 years. And his daughter-in-law, the wife of Phinehas, was pregnant, about to give birth. She heard the news that the ark of God was captured. Her father-in-law and her husband were dead. She gave birth, for her pains came upon her. About that time of her death, the women attending to her said, "Do not be afraid. You have borne a son." But she did not answer or pay attention. She named the child Ichabod, saying, "The glory has departed from Israel," because the ark of God had been captured. Because her father-in-law, because of her father-in-law and her husband, she says, "The glory has departed from Israel, for the ark of God has been captured." A lot of repetition, by the way. When you see a lot of repetition in Hebrew narratives, that means, oh, hey, by the way, this is really important. Ichabod, that which departed, exiled, kind of an idea. Right? She names her child this because as she sees it, there is no longer any what? Hope. Hope is gone. The glory of the Lord is gone. The priests are dead. The box, the ark, has been taken away. Israel has been defeated. How many of y'all ever watched those old Adam West Batman shows? Anybody? Anybody ever watch those old Batman? You know, with the pow, zam, kabooey, or whatever, showed up real big on the screen when they would, yeah. They always came in pairs, right? Y'all notice that, right? The shows always came in pairs. There was always the first show, and at the end of the first show, how did it end? Come on, y'all said you watched them, right? How did the first show always end? All right, it ended very badly. It ended with Batman like hanging over a pit of lava or something, with them sawing the rope above, you know, and it ends, and they're just going like this without making any headway. And you're like, what's going to happen? He's done. He's toast. There's absolutely no way that he could possibly get out of this. And then you have the narrator come on, will Batman escape and be able to, you know, take out the Riddler and what he's trying to do to Gotham? Tune in next week. Same bat time, same bat channel, right? That's where we are right now, is with Israel hanging over the lava pit. And the people are taking right now the saw to the rope. And you're looking at the story and you're saying, is this it? Well, of course, we know, the reader knows, everybody knows, we're going to turn that page, and suddenly Batman's going to have a saw remover or something in his little belt pack that he's able to get out, and the saw suddenly vanishes or something. You know, something's going to happen. Israel's going to be saved. Israel's going to move forward. Israel's going to have a bright future. But at this moment right now, we're about the bleakest that you can get. And that's where we leave the cliffhanger before Samuel finally steps in to who he is as the judge and the leader, the final deliverer of Israel, before he takes his ultimate position as the king anointer. And that's what we will get into next week. All right. Any questions or comments on anything that we talked about here? Yeah. All right. The question, do you think that as Israel brought the ark out to the battlefield, did they think of it as an idol? It's a really good question. In one sense, absolutely. In that it was a representation of God that they felt as if God is attached to, and treated it as such when they brought it in. On the other hand, I don't think there's any indication that it was treated as a representation of God in any kind of real sense, like the images were. They didn't see it as an icon or an image of God, which is literally what, the word idol simply means the image, representation of. But it was treated, yeah, absolutely. It seems that's how they are thinking of the ark and treating it that way. It's a good question. Yeah, Kelly?
You mentioned of Eli's sons' two sins. Which one gets more condemnation. And it just kind of reminded me in the New Testament when Jesus didn't like sin, and he spoke against sin, but he really talked against the people that misled his people, or kept his people from doing the right thing when they wanted to do the right thing. So these guys weren't just taking God's meat. They were making it so other people who were trying to sacrifice and do the right thing couldn't do the right thing.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I think you're supposed to see these kinds of connections in what God clearly thinks of these people and how they're acting with the way that Jesus treats people who act in similar ways to this. So yeah, it's an excellent point. Thank you. Anybody else? All right. Well, good class, guys. Appreciate it. We'll turn it over to Richard now.